Welcome to this edition of the Capital Brief. I'm Seth Berenzweig. We're here in our BL Media studio in lovely downtown Tysons, Virginia, here with our colleague and friend, John Tamny from Real Clear Markets. John, how are you?
I'm great. Good to be back.
Hey, listen, great to see you. We had a short break for summer. And how was the end of your summer?
Better than expected, which is a big victory, I would say.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, this week, and as we head into the fall, we're talking football and pumpkin spice beer. So, a lot of great things to look forward to.
That's right.
So the other thing that I'm looking forward to is our conversation today. And I'd like to have the conversation leap off from an article that I read that I thought was really interesting that you had out just the other day in Real Clear Markets, entitled Vaccines and Mandates and the Predictable Folly of Central Planning. And when I read this, in my mind, the question that it presented for the reader in light of what we've been going through as a nation for the last 18 months or so is, was it all worth it? Can you encapsulate what your thesis is in the article that in Real Clear Markets that I found to be really interesting?
My main thesis is that central planning that doesn't work economically also doesn't work when you're trying to fight a virus. Government plans, quite simply, always come up short, and they do because they rob us of the marketplace. And the marketplace is human action.
So, in other words, you're talking about central planning from D.C. regarding how to attack the problem for COVID-19.
Yeah. President Trump had a national plan for the virus. President Biden promised ahead of inauguration, we're going to throw science and the best experts at this. No. Anytime they are offering plans, we should be a little bit nervous. And I think history will say that Operation Warp Speed, which many conservatives and libertarians and members of the right said, oh, this is great, throw billions at drug companies to bring viruses to the market as quickly as possible.
President Trump was very proud of it.
He was very proud of it, and I think history is going to say that that was another example of the problem of government intervening in what is a marketplace, because you ask yourself the question, what if there is no billions or Operation Warp Speed thrown at the drug makers? It's not to say that they're not going to create a vaccine.
They were working on it regardless.
They were working on it regardless.
Right.
Could they have created it in the amounts that they did? Not a chance.
Right.
Would people have been able to get shots as quickly? Not a chance, because when you're in the business of profit, you can't build up that kind of an inventory and have a national plan. So you think about what that means. Probably the average young, healthy person acknowledges that it's going to take a while and just goes out and gets the virus. To be clear, the New York Times, David Katz
lives his life, in other words.
From the but from the early days, David Katz was saying, go out and get it and develop your immunity. Certainly and so young people were going to do that, probably middle-aged were going to do that because they wanted to get back to their lives. Many old people, many young people too. We all know people who stayed away from restaurants and public spaces throughout.
Sure.
Might have continued to do that, and so good, but society would have done what society does, come up with answers, come up with solutions.
To their own individual preferences.
Yeah. And that is a marketplace. Instead, we will wait until a vaccine arrives that's going to arrive early because government took the money of others to make sure that it did. Is that not playing out negatively right now? And I would say that it is.
So, obviously, we're recognizing the reality of what happened. Not only did the federal government plow big bucks to big pharma, but the government shut down the economy. It's probably and hopefully going to be the only time in our lifetimes that we'll ever see such a thing. Shut down the economy, destroyed many businesses, particularly small businesses, caused people in large degrees to stay home for a very long time. People lost their jobs, businesses shut down, and part of your argument is it resulted in a loss of civil liberties. And therefore, the model asks the question of whether all of those dramatic impacts that ended up curtailing people's basic civil liberties, destroying parts of the economy and so forth, was it worth it versus a model where you're still supporting the pharmaceutical industry taking action, but you're not shutting the country down. In order to really set the table right on this conversation, it would be probably foolish of me to not put out what the immediate response from the opposing side is going to be. And that argument goes as follows. What you're doing is you may be condemning millions of people to death, because even if you assume, based upon the general CDC guidance and statistical analysis, the fatality rate of a little bit less than 0.1% of the population, if you don't treat with vaccinations, which have been demonstrated to be safe and effective, then what you're doing is you're condemning millions of people to die, and as a result of that, that would not be the right approach, because we're a society where that would be a compassionateless approach rather than trying to exercise extraordinary measures. What would be your response to that argument? Because I'm sure you've heard that 100 times.
Oh, yeah. No, look, I would start by saying that even if someone could prove to me that lockdowns and all this would save lives and improve health, I'd still be against them. I think freedom is a virtue on its own, and I don't like results-based excuses to take away freedom. But to me, the worst arguments against the lockdowns were always the original ones: protect hospitals and protect millions of lives. Well, wait a second. Who needs to be forced to avoid behavior that might result in hospitalization? Who especially needs to be forced to avoid behavior that might result in death? What if they'd predicted 30 million, 50 million American deaths? Any kind of government force or mandates at that point would pale in comparison to what people acting in their best interest would do on their own.
Right.
And so the more threatening something is, and so
it presumes that people are otherwise incompetent to be able to make decisions, to take care of themselves in their own personal situation.
Exactly. It insults them. The more threatening something is, the less need for government force. And so it's when you need freedom the most when something's really threatening, because what do people acting in their self-interest do for you? They produce crucial information. The excuse was there's an unknown out there. Okay, well, let's find out about the unknown. You can only do that by some people were going to hit every bar and party. Some people were going to lock down. People were going to go in between. Businesses were going to do the same thing. The people are the marketplace. And when we needed that marketplace producing crucial information to learn more about this virus, we suffocated, we actually blinded the very people we were looking to help.
The government instructed shutdown of the economy, wreck businesses, put people in their homes, and basically told them this is what's going to happen, and this is going to be what's best for you. And I think that part of the valid criticism that comes out in support of your argument in terms of questioning the efficacy of government commands is take a look what happened in the nursing homes. There was a centralization of patients who it was not clearly known as diligently early on who were more increasingly susceptible to the virus. And then when they were brought into nursing homes, for example, in New York, it ended up being a horrible disaster, and it actually increased fatalities. It didn't decrease it. So, after reading your article, one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted to take a look at how other countries dealt with this that may have, to some degree, followed your advice. And that they knew that you were so smart about the advice that they followed it even before you gave them the advice. And I found the example of Sweden. Sweden is a very interesting case study. The lead epidemiologist in the government in Sweden issued a recommendation that was followed by the government of no lockdown. What they did was they provided selective recommendations based upon risk profile. They did not shut down. They did not eliminate civil liberties. That was very controversial. They were criticized deeply. They said that that was an extremely cold-hearted thing to do. Okay, 18 months later, how did it go in Sweden? Because again, I think that at least to some degree follows your model. And Sweden was not anti-vax. Sweden was still promoting vaccination. They just weren't willing to shut down the economy and take away civil liberties. How does the data look in Sweden? You know, everybody has a little bit of a different takeaway on it, but I think it's reasonable to say that the data shows that Sweden's approach was not unreasonable, and it was generally effective. It did not have the catastrophic results that were predicted. The businesses in Sweden did not face mass destruction. The economy was not fractured. The overall profile of Sweden's effectiveness relative to other European countries is generally in the top third. They were not the best, but they were generally up in the top third. So what Sweden did, in large part, followed the road that you're suggesting we should have taken, and it doesn't seem that they were any the worse for it. Have you seen other examples of other governments doing things during this crisis where you had to take away and thinking that maybe somebody had it better than we did?
Well, you could certainly look within states in the United States. Obviously, South Dakota didn't lock down at all, so that would perhaps be an example. I argue, and when politicians panic, that once we make statistical arguments, we've won the argument, but lost the debate. This should be about freedom first and foremost, but. Sweden is a good example simply because it's a reminder that just because government doesn't mandate something doesn't mean that individual self-interested people won't do it on their own.
Right.
And I only bring up my book because there's interesting information in there. I took most of my information from the New York Times by design because I wanted to check on my passion against the lockdowns. And the New York Times was very clear about this, that the states that locked down last didn't have people just out in bars and restaurants just going hog wild. In fact, the states that locked down last were populated by people who started taking precautions first, as in that they acted for themselves well ahead of politicians. They stopped going to restaurants as much. They stopped going into crowded places. And so again, it's just a reminder that people don't need a law to avoid that which might result in disease and death. And so the answer is always freedom.
Right.
Because the people who are doing exactly what experts told them not to do, we're going to provide for you the most crucial information of all. Really, how lethal is this? If you're around other people, are you going to get sick the quickest?
Right.
But also, it allows for people to try all manner of different ways of protecting themselves, and we learn from that best practices.
Why not let the government be a resource rather than a dictator? Why not let the government come out and say, look, we have access to a lot of information. Here's our recommendation. If you're older, you're more susceptible. If you're younger, you can still get sick, but you have less of a risk profile. You should take the vaccine because it's safe and effective, but you don't have to hide before you do it. And one of the things that I think has really destroyed the credibility of the government, both federal and local, is just the very frustrating inconsistency of what's happening. As I've said in other broadcasts, I live in Montgomery County, Maryland. To this day, I have no idea what the hell the people who are governing Montgomery County are thinking about. Thank goodness I work here in Tyson's Corner in Fairfax County. I love Fairfax County. I love working in Northern Virginia. It's a fantastic community. I can go out. People are encouraged to wear masks. If people want to wear a mask, they can, but it's not that they must. If people want to, shelter and wait for the Delta variant to go away, they can, but they're not commanded that they must. In Montgomery County, I was told, bend the curve. I bent the curve. I worked on that. Get your vaccine. I got my vaccine. Maryland is over 80% vaccinated. Montgomery County is over 90% vaccinated. I'm still ordered now to continue to wear a mask. While people who did not follow that dictate are now requiring the other 90% of us to wear a mask. So what the government now is doing is first they tell you this is what you must do. But now to make it worse, what they're doing is they're acceding to the lowest common denominator. And there's no more incentive for any of this, where people are doing their best to follow, but there's a lot of inconsistency. And there are governors who are controversial, and I'm not saying that I'm necessarily a fan, but one of the reasons why Governor DeSantis in Florida has a lot of donations coming in for his potential presidential run is because he's taking a stand on issues that some say are related to freedom. I usually don't agree with Governor DeSantis, but I can see exactly what he's doing. People are really getting very passionate about this, obviously. Let's talk about what's happening as we speak. President Biden is in the process of announcing the issuance of executive orders to lean forward further on vaccinations. And for example, he's going to require federal employees get vaccinated, federal government contractors, huge industry here in the Washington, D.C. area, get vaccinated. Here they come again, John. What do you think is going to be happening over the coming weeks?
Oh, it's going to be fascinating. This is the latest. And as you allude from Montgomery County, they always have the next solution. The problem is no one's asking them the obvious question. We don't have plans for iPhones. We don't have plans for restaurants. But we have them. We have supercomputers in our pockets. We have myriad choices. When you walk out of your office building here, any kind of food you want is within a microscopic portion of the land. Why would an attempt to fight a virus be any different? Why would you suddenly rely on a national plan? And so I think we've got to start asking that question. And so the plan now is to vaccinate certain parts of the population. Well, guess what? Israel got all sorts of huzzas for being a fully vaccinated country.
One of the first out of the gate.
It turns out, if present evidence is any kind of indicator, that maybe it doesn't work nearly as well as the natural immunity. Mm-hmm. Oh, wait, whoops, because see, if government had stayed out of the way, if they hadn't funded so much of, free vaccine, probably a lot of people, rather than holding up for months at a time, would have said, we've just got to get on with our lives, go get the virus. Again, It was well known. You didn't need the government to tell you that. It was very well known that the vast majority of people getting it didn't experience major symptoms.
Right.
They develop natural immunity, and suddenly they're much safer for old people to be around.
Right.
I can't help but think that this big rise in hospitalizations is yet again related to government having a plan for vaccination that got in the way of natural human action that would have resulted in much better outcomes long term.
Right. I think that some of my approach on this differs as it relates to wanting to push heavily to encourage people to get vaccinated. And I think that that's something that it is very debatable. And I think you've raised an excellent issue about Operation Warp Speed ended up being cost effective. And I think that's going to be a valid debate that's going to go on for years. But although I'm glad that a lot of us are leaning into getting vaccinated, the part that frustrates me is the inconsistency in the enforcement and how the people who are complying don't seem to get any benefits, while the people who are not complying don't seem to get any deterrence. Mm-hmm. And that really doesn't seem fair to me. Another development that's been happening in the marketplace that I think is relevant, and frankly, I think either directly or indirectly is supportive of your argument of just let the market work it out, is I've noticed that over the last couple of weeks, more big businesses have come out with their own plans with regard to vaccination. Now, on the one hand, you could say, again, we could have the debate about, how necessary vaccination was at the end of the day, but corporate America is leaning forward in their own way, and they're making their own decisions, which I think, again, supports your thesis that if you let the private marketplace make their own decisions, and they may not always make perfect decisions, but at least they're able to self-regulate and do things in the way that they're able to do based upon their own determinations. if a board of directors for a major corporation or even a small corporation makes the right call, then they're going to get the support of the shareholders. If the board of directors makes a bad call, then they're going to get the axe by the shareholders by the time they get the next shareholders meeting. So isn't corporate freedom and corporate democracy one of the barometers that really is one of the best ways to create a path forward through us as we try to get to the end of this?
Well, let's use another business example. Remember when Burger King rolled out the Beyond Meat Burger or whatever that was? I can't believe it's Meat Burger.
Right.
They didn't roll it out in all 7,000 Burger Kings in the U.S. They, in fact, did it in St. Louis in about 30 restaurants. Let's test it out. Let's test this market, see how it goes. Let's not force it on everyone. And so the beauty of this, they learned from a smaller marketplace how to roll it out nationally. And so businesses are a perfect example here. Mm-hmm. Let them try different ways of doing this, and from this we learn best practices. My only skepticism about this, and you allude to it with the contractor scenario here. There's so many businesses that are reliant on the biggest purchaser in the world, which is the federal government.
And Biden's order is going to have a huge impact in that regard.
It's going to, and so when the federal government is the most size buyer in the world. Mm-hmm. I feel like if they're suddenly having a role in the rollout of the vaccines, that there's this pressure. You talk to any bank CEO, and they'll say, if you get a call from President Biden or the Treasury Secretary asking you to do something, that's really an order. And guaranteed, if you don't follow their advice, you're going to get a call from a regulator the next day, and you're going to get a call that you don't want to get.
Right.
And so it's a little bit worrisome here. The challenge of government having a role in virus fighting is exactly this, because I think I want different businesses trying different things. The concern is that many are going to feel forced to go the vaccination route precisely because it pleases people here.
And that they're going to want to not poke the bear.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Not poke the bear. Yeah, exactly. So let's wrap this up and just end with a closing question. When we get into a final landing on this, and we look back and we're going to try to look at drawing the biggest lesson learned from this entire period of American history, what do you think that biggest lesson will be?
I think the lesson is going to be, we love experts, but we are terrified when experts are leading us. Look at the track record throughout this. Experts said masks are unnecessary. Then they said they're necessary. Experts said we must lock down at all costs. We can't worry about the results. And there are businesses boarded up around the country. Global desperation of the poverty and starvation variety because we took a break from reality here.
Yeah.
Experts said, if you just get the vaccine, life is going to go back to normal. Whoops, that doesn't seem to have worked out. My take is that after all this, if you're not a libertarian, if you're not a major skeptic of central decrees, you need your head examined, because this was the best. If there's a silver lining to this tragedy, and let's be clear, this was the biggest human rights tragedy of the 21st century. The 20th century had things that are unspeakable.
Sure.
But of the 21st century, if nothing else, I'd like to think that we learn from this the danger of centralizing so much power, because they got it wrong, and the experts they side with got it wrong over and over again, which we should expect. No expert is smarter than the marketplace.
Yeah, listen, I think that's a message that really needs to be taken to heart. I'll wrap us up today by saying that I believe that one of the lessons learned, in my view, is that Washington needs to get on message. If Washington is going to use its huge apparatus and infrastructure and legal dictates to tell us what to do, then they need to be able to get their message straight on what's going on, because you have people on both sides of the aisle that are screaming at each other. And I'm not saying that one side is right and one side is wrong. Both sides are equally flawed. But it would really be great if some of the leaders in Washington would be able to get back to the old days when Tip O'Neill would go over and have a beer with Ronald Reagan. If these people are going to command us to do something, and I think you're right that they should be more guiding us rather than commanding us. The people who are in charge need to be able to sit down and try to get some kind of a consensus, because it's a disgrace that people in Washington are still bickering with each other, and they care more about their own individual politics than for the greater good. So I think getting more of a unified message, especially in a moment of crisis, would really be greatly appreciated from Americans on both sides of the political aisle. John, great conversation once again, and we'll see you next time.
See you next week.